Thank you all and welcome to the presentation. I apologize for not being there in person, but in a way I actually don't mind because it's a great way to show how something, a simple commercial platform like Twitch, can be useful for you in your public health practice. So, welcome to Hacking Games and Media for Public Health. So first I just want to issue these disclosures and the disclaimer. So this will be recorded, by the way, so you'll be able to download it at a later time. And we're going to define hacking, talk about what we mean by that, and then give some examples of how we could develop interventions or existing interventions that are useful for public health and medicine. Then we'll talk about some pitfalls, research challenges, and some opportunities, and then we'll finish up with key takeaways and a slew of references. So first, when I talk about hacking, I'm not talking about breaking into systems to get access to data. I mean the kind of hacking that means like clever ways that commercial games and social media can be used to address the limitations with current public health and medical research and interventions. So the goal of this presentation is just to get everybody thinking differently about how we view the role of entertainment media in health. I'll tell you about the many different ways that innovative researchers, clinicians, and communities are already using commercial games and social media to foster health. But don't worry, we're also going to get to potential problems as well. So I want to make sure that we're addressing both sides of the story. And my pages are backwards, so that's going to be inspiring and fun for me. So first, I want to contrast commercial video games and social media with digital games or platforms that are designed primarily for health. Now, unlike commercial games and social media, most games or media interventions that are designed for health purposes don't focus primarily on engagement. They have a job to do. So even if they look great on the outside and they're flashy and colorful, really users can tend to see them as like this chocolate-covered broccoli. And this often happens because they don't use a user-centered design and they're not able to sustain engagement. They might disappear from the scientific literature and get added to that list of interventions that never make it out of pilot. We're all familiar with those. Another problem, which is hopefully in the past, is that when games or interventions make claims that aren't substantiated by evidence, like luminosity. Hopefully the $2 million fine that the FTC gave them a little while ago will make sure that developers of games for health don't make these unfounded claims. So it takes forever to fund, plan, and get human subjects approval for developed prototypes. And then you've got to test the prototypes in human subjects in multiple trials to show that games work and that they're effective. By the time you've got an effective product, what's happened? Your tech is outdated and it's possibly even obsolete. And the last lab that I worked at, the Games for Emotional and Mental Health lab, had this problem where they had an amazing game that was developed with game designers. It was a beautiful game. It used neurofeedback to reduce anxiety in children with elevated anxiety. It worked. It did a great job. But the biofeedback controller went out of date before they could finish the amount of clinical trials that would be useful to push it out to the community. Overall, let's contrast this situation with the place of commercial video games in society right now. And I will focus more on video games because that's where the majority of my research is. But this also applies for social media, and I'll work that in as well. The commercial video game industry is the biggest entertainment industry in the world. So just to give you a couple numbers to compare, for example, when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in 2013, it sold over 800 million copies in the first day. And compare that to the last Avengers movie, Endgame. The first weekend total was only 357 million. So we're not comparing exact product for product, but it just gives you an idea of the magnitude of interest and spending on video games. Streaming content. So what we're doing here is live streaming, and we're live streaming on a video game specific platform. It has since branched out, and there are a lot of channels that are related to what's called in the internet culture IRL, in real life. That is not gaming related. And so there's even a science and technology section. Usually it focuses on coding and other gaming related things, but it's a fantastic way to engage your audience. And I can see Elemento talking to me. And I'd like to respond because that's the whole purpose of having a Twitch channel, is developing a community and engaging with your audience. But because I'm also trying to do a presentation, I'm going to stick with doing the presentation. But the next time I stream, I'll be able to interact and involve my audience as I go along. So anyway, Twitch viewers live streamed about 2.7 billion hours in the second quarter of last year. And that was 72% of all live streaming hours across all platforms. And in terms of concurrent engagement, esports, for example, League of Legends, which is the game that's being televised here in this little picture. Like my regular words are going to fail me. That's what's going to happen with this presentation. Anyway, one of their events reached 1.7 million concurrent viewers on Twitch. So it doesn't compare to football or soccer or other global sports yet, but it's really getting up there in terms of concurrent views. So let's move on to the evolution of video games. Now, as you know, video games have been around for, oh my gosh. Well, the first video game was created in 1945, but then they became popular in the 70s and 80s. And so we've gone from the 80s Super Mario to massively multiplayer online role-playing games, MMOs like World of Warcraft in the 2000s. And now we have virtual reality and augmented reality. So in a little over 40 years, we've gone from black and white TV-based games to taking your game out into the world with this augmented reality, or putting yourself in the game with virtual reality. And millions of people play all over the world. Almost half of US households own a game console, and about 65% of people in the US play games, usually on their mobile phones now. The average gamer is not a child or a young adult. The average gamer is 35. And $43 billion was spent on games and related products in 2018. Oh, thank you, Elemento. See, now maybe this isn't the best format for me, particularly because I'm easily distracted. But thank you, Elemento. So here's our timeline. If we think about the evolution of the technology, innovation is driven by the need for entertainment. So here we can see how gaming has pushed the development of technologies through the years, from massively multiplayer online games where thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are connected at once. Now games can get ported to the mobile phone, onto virtual reality and augmented reality. Games can be distributed digitally through platforms like Steam. And we have also social and communication streaming platforms like Twitch. Gamers are savvy and demanding consumers, and for-profit entertainment companies want to keep their users engaged. The pace of this technology is just far greater than anything we can do in academia. One challenge about hacking games and social media is their emergent nature. People use games and social media for reasons. They use them for fun or pleasure, to keep up with family and friends, to distract from the stressors of daily life, or even from unbearable pain. And the experience of games and social media is different each time you use it. So here's an example of what we mean by emergent properties. Both of these games are the same genre of game. They're both called sandbox games. There's no rules. There's no specific progress. You just do what you want. On the left, you see Minecraft. You build stuff with blocks. you collect things, and you build things. And in this creative mode, you can concentrate on building, you can fly, you can work with people to create, for example, the UN. Or you could play in adventure mode that gives you a different experience, survival mode, and there are spin-offs for that focus on narratives or education. There's a strong community in Minecraft. There are developers who create content. It's really become an amazing game with a lot of different applications. Now, if you wanted to play a slightly different sandbox genre game, you could play Rust. In Rust, you start with a rock and a torch. You have to find clothes and shelter. You fight bears and wolves. You face hypothermia, starvation, radiation, and basically the whole time you're fighting for your life, against other players even, if you want. You find the same thing in social media. Oh, I wanted to talk about community. So you find the same things in social media. So here's an example of a community within a game, World of Warcraft. And this character is basically using the community setting of the game to provide support to another real player. There's a great platform for providing that support, or you could use it the way I'm using it right now, to disseminate research or engage with the community. You could use it to share pictures of your kids or hilarious memes. But the problem is, communities can also be toxic and filled with trolling, harassment, or even promoting unhealthy behaviors. So this is a picture from a pro-anorexia website. Thank you to one of our digital health students for publishing about this. Now here is a description of the different functions that we do in public health. And probably most of you are familiar with this. And what I would like to suggest is that we can build on video games and social media to really conduct most of these functions. And in fact, many of the functions would be made much easier if we do them through commercial platforms. So just a very quick example. Right now, with concerns about coronavirus, we're really going through this whole public health wheel. And especially if you think about the light green, inform, educate, empower, Twitch has the ability to reach so many people and provide them with accurate information in real time and get feedback immediately on how well our communication works. And in a way, because Twitch involves a very casual internet culture that has its own rules and practices, to me, it would be an especially good audience to do this engagement. And in fact, that's consistent with the recent World Health Organization guidance. In their systematic review, they identified finding ways to engage with the younger community and a more social media savvy community to determine what their needs are with risk communication. So I will be doing some education and risk communication using Twitch, so you can keep an eye on this channel, and I will try to do that as often as I can. So combining those functions, my colleagues and I came up with this framework for understanding how video games could be used for public health and therapy. So we start with users who, based on their life experiences and their social context and their existing health behaviors, they choose games. They also choose social media. And these provide purposeful engagement and an immersive experience. They allow them to interact with others. They promote teamwork. And they promote participation in a community, which is something that is very important to health. Now, the amazing thing about games and social media is that we can use the data that they automatically collect to develop ways to identify risk and identify need for intervention, and then actually deliver those interventions. So probably everyone here is familiar with how that is already taking place with Twitter and identification of, for example, suicide risk. But this same context can be applied to games as well. So here's an example. And what is this coming up? Okay. I didn't realize these animations were here, so I'm already befuddled. So on the left, this little patch of data is an example of data that you can scrape from the API for World of Warcraft. These could become features in a machine learning algorithm. Once you conduct the necessary research to determine how these features could be used to, for example, predict suicide risk or risk of a depressive episode, you could actually deliver the appropriate scales within the game using the game's user interface. So you reduce that, breaking the immersion. And that would really facilitate determining whether this risk identification works. And then you can continue that process and actually deliver the intervention in the game. So here, an avatar is talking to another avatar. These are both players, and actually offering to talk and offering that support. And I'll talk in a minute about how support is offered online by communities. So this is an example of the framework in action. So what are the different ways that you can hack? You can use games or social media as an intervention in and of itself, or an adjunct to an intervention. You can use them to facilitate another healthcare process. You can layer a mod, which is a modification of the user interface, or a bot onto an existing game or social media platform. Or you can use a platform to deliver an intervention specifically. Just a quick review. These are just a few of the studies that are out there that talk about what's already been done to use games as interventions. So Tetris. Tetris is a puzzle game. Probably everyone's familiar with it. And it has been used in a couple of clinical trials after individuals have had trauma, I think emergency C-section and motor vehicle crash. When people were given the game Tetris to play, they had fewer, right after within like 7 hours of the trauma in the emergency room, they had fewer intrusive thoughts over the following 2 weeks, which suggests that perhaps playing Tetris, which is a very cognitively complex game, might interfere with the consolidation of traumatic memories. So this is just a really fascinating example. That's one of my favorite ones. Bejeweled was studied to determine whether it could reduce depression and anxiety. And it was clinically significant reductions in depression and anxiety were found among people who played it compared to playing other types of games. Now the horror game Left 4 Dead, let's just jump to something entirely different. This study was conducted with soldiers, and it determined that playing this game, which is a game that is designed to cause fear and arousal, playing this game combined with traditional biofeedback techniques reduces stress or increases the resilience to stress among soldiers. And that was actually observed through reduction in salivary cortisol levels. Exergames or active games like Wii Sports have been used in so many studies. They can increase physical activity in the low to moderate range. That's a pretty robust finding. There haven't been robust findings in terms of weight loss or reduction in BMI, but they've also been used to determine whether they can be useful in fall prevention for the elderly. And they do seem to reduce falls and improve mobility, but they also surprisingly seem to help with cognitive skills, and they seem to reduce depression among the elderly. The depression result might be because people are doing something more active, and sometimes in these studies they're actually playing as a group. But that's just a really interesting incidental finding. Action strategy games, probably everyone has heard that they improve cognitive skills. Some of those findings are fairly robust outside of the lab. Many of the earlier studies did not, the findings did not generalize outside of laboratory settings. So what's come out later is that it seems like certain things generalize better. And for example, League of Legends players, that's one of the esports games. That's the one that's shown here. League of Legends players who are in the top rankings, like the world's most highly ranked players, do better on reaction time, and I think it's working memory, than people who play just as much League of Legends but aren't ranked as highly. So the studies are getting a little bit better, and we're learning a little bit more about what exactly is going on with the transferability of some of these things that we're learning from games. They can also be used for monitoring and assessment, and that's where you see solitaire. There's a group in Belgium that has mapped the different things that can be measured from solitaire onto cognitive functions. And so for the last few years, they've been trying to determine if just observing older adults playing solitaire can be a valid measure of changes in cognitive function. So social media, we also have some of the same types of interventions going on. So in the upper left, you see the Stack Up Overwatch program. Stack Up is an organization for veteran gamers that I've been involved with for a few years. Excuse me one sec. Doing pretty good with the voice, but still have to be a little bit careful. So the Stack Up Discord, the Discord is a communication server that has over 1,100 members, and they offer crisis intervention services from trained volunteers 24/7. They just instituted a partnership with Wargaming, which will be putting a button within the World of Warships game to allow people who play that game to be immediately connected to the Stack Up Overwatch program if they need somebody to talk to. So that's really an amazingly innovative way of using communication. And then to the right, you see a Facebook group. This is just a group from University of Malaya Medical Center, started in 2014 to promote exercise and healthy lifestyle for cancer survivors, and it's still active. Now, in video games, like you see in the lower left, World of Warcraft, this picture comes from a news article about a guild, which is kind of like a team within a video game. And the guild helped a disabled member who was blind, helped him to participate fully in the game, in the highest levels of the game. So that's a level of social support and fostering participation that is pretty unique. And then this large picture in the middle here is an example from one of the studies by Coppersmith and his group, who study risk identification for suicide and mental disorders using Twitter. And they use natural language processing and other types of algorithms to identify when users might be at risk. So eventually, we'll figure out how to deliver interventions just in time. Right now, it's a little trickier with Twitter and other asynchronous platforms because obviously they're asynchronous for the most part. And then, let's see, I'm going to check my time. Okay, not doing too badly. So these quotes are from a study that I did a couple of years ago where I examined why military veterans play and what they get out of video games. I worked with collaborators from psychology, nursing, media psychology, communication science, and public health to analyze interviews with veterans who were in treatment for mental or behavioral health problems. And we found that veterans used video games to promote their mental health recovery, and that games helped in a few domains. They helped the veterans connect. Like you could see that the top quote, we played specific combat games together. We all know the lingo. So it's that feeling of belongingness that's so helpful for mental health. Meaning, soldiers, particularly veterans, sometimes have to make sense of the things that they observed or did during combat. And this veteran found that the playing a game where he could rewind the action and make a different decision really was powerful for him. And then distraction. It's hard to underestimate the value of distraction. I think that's one of the things that video games get a bad rap for, but if you think about it from the perspective of people with disabilities, this bottom quote speaks to the danger of people who have depression and can't feel that relief. They need something to do in those times when they might be ruminating, or I also spoke with veterans who said they used games to avoid using substances and to get away from those cravings. So this idea of using games and social media for harm reduction, though, is really in conflict with the way that we've been thinking about them from a public health perspective for a while. So let's move on to those potential pitfalls. There are many domains that we can worry about if we're thinking about the use of games and social media for health promotion. So excessive engagement, could we be causing problematic technology use? Are we encouraging sedentary behavior? And not to mention displacing other activities. Is all this time that we might promote on social media or games, will this take away from other healthy activities that we would definitely be doing if we didn't have easy access to computers and games, like exercising or spending time outdoors or gathering around the piano and singing? Is that a valid concern? It's hard to really address that because it kind of gets down to how has society changed, and when we think about displacing other activities, would people really be doing these other activities if they could, or would they prefer to be connected through games and social media? So it's also a matter of preference. What about privacy? It's clearly virtually impossible to protect your internet data on public websites. And there are huge challenges in making sure that however we conduct this research, we protect human subjects to the standards that we're used to. And that's one of the things that we find with some of this research is that it comes from different disciplines. So it's sometimes a challenge if you're coming from public health, for example, and you're reviewing a paper that seems like it may have come out of a computer science department. The familiarity with human subjects protection is not the same. So that's why we have to make sure one of the ways we address these is by having multidisciplinary collaborations, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Toxic social interactions and other bad things, that's also a concern. I just realized I mentioned problematic technology use, but I don't think I defined it. So by that, that's what Tokimon is there for. Oh, the name didn't come up. Oh, I usually make sure that the name is very visible. This was created by Brian Saunders in 2012. And I guess I'll post the slides. I'll make sure his name's on there. Problematic technology use, also called video game addiction, social media addiction. The official terms are internet gaming disorder or gaming disorder, but really research is continuing into what it means to be excessively using a technology to the point where it's causing harm. And Right, so getting back to toxic social interactions and other bad things. If we let people play around on the internet, they could be subject to bad human behavior. The anonymity of the internet, some aspects of internet culture really do seem to promote confiding, which can be very useful, but sometimes they also promote a lack of accountability. And that leads to toxicity and things like trolling, harassment, cyberbullying, or encouragement of unhealthy behaviors like I showed in the previous slide. So we don't want people to be exposed to those things. We don't want to promote them. There's advertising that can sometimes go on within games and social media that's inconsistent with public health goals. We really want to be careful about that. I want to make sure I don't come across as flippant or recklessly encouraging and immediately jumping into these kinds of opportunities, because in reality, these are very serious problems. At this time, I haven't seen a single protocol that I feel addresses all of these adequately. So I would encourage anyone who's really interested in this to make sure that you are addressing all of these potential pitfalls as you consider how to design your research. So now we'll talk about research challenges and opportunities. And I'm trying to use my notes and the pages aren't turning. So there are a lot of challenges to doing this research. Challenges are, I would say, every challenge you have with a digital health intervention, take that and add all these extra challenges. So first we have big data. Now, we're starting to get a handle on how to use big data in many ways, but now we're adding the problem of the big data is coming in forms that are familiar to companies, but not necessarily as familiar to researchers. The data is considered proprietary by the company usually. They may share parts of it. They may have a user interface that fosters developers working with it, but we still may not be able to access the best data to do what we want to do. And then we may not understand where the data is coming from exactly or how it's created. So the ideal situation is to have a partnership with an industry partner to figure out, is the data actually going to be able to answer the question that we want it to answer? Basically, the provenance of it. So again, I think I'm just going to keep reiterating this. Answering these challenges comes down to making sure you have the right people on the team. And it's very important to make sure that you have people who are well-versed in understanding and using this kind of data, in addition to people who understand the ethical challenges associated with it, and people who can design the studies to make sure that we're actually evaluating what we want to evaluate with the proper outcomes, and not just creating and validating an algorithm, for example. So evidence development is going to be tricky because, as you can see from the little gray square, we have so many different names for the same thing. And evidence development is one of the things I really love, but it's such a challenge. I think if we're studying video games, could we just say video game, please? That would be very, very useful. I've seen studies where they are literally using Microsoft Connect on an Xbox with an Xbox game, and they're just calling it virtual reality. So standardization, not just of the terms, but also the outcomes that we measure, the protocols, that would all be really useful for bringing together, synthesizing this research. We need to plan for scale, and that's why we have the little Starbucks there. That shows you that we have to kind of think of sustainability as we develop these things, and figuring out how to do these partnerships, these ethical ways to partner with industry, is going to be very important. The conflict of interest, will need to be clear about those partnerships and how they're funded. And then as we plan studies and we plan interventions, if we're building on something that's commercially available, then it may have different rules and regulations in different parts of the world. So we need to understand what those are and make sure that our intervention will work where we want it to work. And there are some best practices that we could follow when we design studies. We could use standardized methods and terminology. Where's my ethical partnerships? There, that's the best one. We could build in monitoring and evaluation before we begin, measure engagement, but also measure adverse effects, and make sure outcomes are harmonized. We want to plan for scale. How do we sustain the funding? How do we fit in with the regulations of the different countries? And make sure we have ethical engagement with industry. So here's an example of an ethical partnership. Do we want to consider a partner that advertises something that is against public health principles? Now, this is obviously a joke advertisement within a video game, but that's one of the arguments that's made about partnering with tobacco, for example. So that's something that we have to consider. If there's a known harm, and we're clear that it's a harm, is that considered an ethical partnership for us as public health scientists? One way that we can promote ethical partnerships is by using open science principles. And I am making a big effort to register my work with the Center for Open Science, the Open Science Framework site. So please feel free to visit my project sites there. And finally, again, we have to pay attention to big data. We have to plan for the scale of the data, for the users and the parts of the world. Like I said before, making sure that whatever we're collecting, we can make sure that we could roll it out in the places that we expect to be able to. So finally, some key takeaways. Please don't serve chocolate-covered broccoli. Sorry, one second. My voice did pretty well considering the cough. There are a lot of opportunities for games and communities to promote health, and many of them are already in practice through the communities that created them and gave us opportunities to evaluate them. You can totally take advantage of the popularity of the existing products to overcome problems with engagement, but harms, like we listed, are possible, as with any intervention. I think one of the things that really struck me as I was preparing for this final stretch of the presentation was the fact that after how many years on the market, Singular came out with a black box warning about possible suicidal thoughts. So to me, that was really profound, because we find that with all sorts of products that have been on the market, that these harms come out well after they've already been judged to be safe and effective. So let's keep that in mind. You know, I think the trick with games and social media is that the harms are either unknown, well, they're mostly unknown, but I think people really are concerned about them. And it's not clear whether there's as much evidence for the harms as we have maybe in the backs of our minds. So the research overall, there are so many challenges. It does have to be approached very carefully, and many different types of people need to be involved. Not just different types of scientists, but also the end users, you know, gamers or social media users, industry members to help keep an eye on what's coming down the pike, and people who understand how to deal with knowledge management and even administrative issues for managing these collaborations. So I hope everyone will consider these before you start designing your next intervention, whether it's a game for health or something that involves commercial games or social media. And I look forward to all your questions. So thank you. I'm going to take a look at the chat now. I actually have two monitors. My producer came in and set up a monitor. my producer being my daughter. So let's see. I am going to scroll up because I see Alan is linking a Zoom link to me. But if I do that, then I'm going to lose my Twitch. So let me see if I can do it on my phone. So now I'll have literally 5 monitors in front of me. Okay, let's see. I think our first commenter, Elemento, said that they couldn't stay too long. Okay, so Ginger Ninja Girl, I love that name. If you are the meeting host, sign in to start the meeting. I'm not the meeting host. Join meeting as an attendee. Sorry, I'm going to mumble to myself for a minute while I read. It looks like I have to download the app from the App Store. So, Alan, just give me a minute and I will do that, and then I'll be able to join. I'm going to read Ginger Ninja Girl while this is doing. Now Alan says no. Yeah. It's not letting me join because I'm on my phone, so it's forcing me to download. It'll just take a minute. I have a pretty fast Wi-Fi, so it should be okay. Okay, Ginger Ninja Girl, while this is downloading. Do I have thoughts about how to advocate at a systems level for policy and opportunities to shape the platforms themselves? I'm struck by the fact that we don't really have training initiatives at the intersection of public health and design. Given the broader political climate, I worry that it would be, we think it impossible that internet... Okay, so I completely agree with you. There's a lot of negative rhetoric about games and the internet right now. At a policy level, it's difficult because there are some academic institutions and centers that are able to work on policy. We don't have one at Hopkins yet, but maybe if we work on it, we can develop this expertise. Okay, 1 second. I think I'm going to be able to join the Zoom now. I think right off the top of my head, I would say contact one of the industry advocacy organizations, or what is that? The Oxford Internet Institute does some work in that. Oh, gracious. Okay. My name, I'm sorry, I'm entering my name. Okay, now I'm joined with video and the mic, and I'm getting notifications. Ginger Ninja Girl, that sounds great, and I think I have my email address down there, so please feel free to email me. Oh, let me go to my references too. So hopefully, Alan, it says the meeting host will let you in soon. So how could gaming be used to report data, coverage data of interventions? Well, there are a lot of measures of engagement that gaming already collects. So if you're great. Yeah, I'm going to have a hard time getting audio. Let's see. Okay, now I can hear you. Yeah, can you hear me? You could probably hear me in both places. I wonder if it's possible that somebody could... Oh, that sounds terrible. Yeah, I think it's probably going to work better for me to talk in Twitch. And then I feel like if there's somebody in on the Twitch chat who could type in the questions, that would be really useful. Because I really don't think that I'm going to be able to get any viable audio out of the Zoom. Apologies again for not being able to make it in, but I think I did pretty well given the cough. And it is a disadvantage, obviously, of this. Oh, hello. I can kind of see you and hear you a little bit, but there's just so much feedback. Okay, so questions have been emailed. Let me see if I can find them. Yeah, I see we still have some viewers, and folks are going to email questions. Feel free to ask any more questions. It looks like the in-person, the people who are attending the presentation at Hopkins have left, but some people are still signed in to the Twitch stream. So if I don't have 143 viewers, that would be something. So if anyone is still in the Twitch stream and they have questions, feel free to ask them. And I'll hang around for a few more minutes. Yeah, I didn't talk about my super high-tech streaming setup with my blanket hanging down here, put up with clips. Oh, I absolutely agree with you, Ginger. It's really, really striking. I am not that great with pivoting on these challenges, but at least I know to expect any any possible tech challenge that can arise. I feel like many people don't take advantage of the possibility for collaboration between the disciplines. And disciplines means everything from scientific disciplines to people who understand how to troubleshoot audio. Or, the financial people who can put together, how you can get grants from completely different institutions or funders that expect completely different things. Well, I think personally I haven't come across many ways to use the gaming culture to educate people other than I personally have been going to video game conventions for several years and giving talks about my research, both in problematic gaming and games for health, or using commercial games for health. And cultivating efficacy, do you mean efficacy with technology use? Gaming culture as a way to educate people to use tech, but also cultivate efficacy. Or maybe you mean efficacy as in a personal sense of autonomy and empowerment. Because it's funny, if you mean it that way, then we don't usually think of tech as a way to do that for people who aren't already good at tech. But certainly, one of the things I found in my study with veterans is that veterans who were able to use games to build a career or a following, that really improved their sense of meaning in their life. Because obviously if you're, you have a purpose. So if you're using that to build your personal purpose, whether you're making, enough money to have it be your job, or you're working towards being a partnered streamer, connecting to knowledge networks, yeah, I did gloss over that, but a lot of the research outside of public health, from communication science specifically, has talked about using games to develop social capital. And we know that games can help you develop bridging and bonding social capital. So you can develop that bonding social capital and form close friendships, which are fostered by the anonymity of the internet, but can develop into real, true friendships where you can rely on people in times of need. But obviously, first we think of bridging social capital, where we can learn all kinds of things that we wouldn't otherwise learn, and connect to that information that we wouldn't normally have access to. Another thing that I got out of a recent review that I was doing was that we can also think of these online social networks as a way to link people to institutions or programs that can be useful to them. So like a formal linkage of people to, or helping institutions. Okay, I think I'm going to head out, but I want to thank everybody for watching, and I will be coming back in the coming days with information about coronavirus. And if you'd like, my email is, if it's not in my bio, then it's on my blog, so you can reach me and feel free to email some questions. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. And now I'm going to figure out how to stop my stream. Okay, have a good day, everybody. Bye.